Hello guys, welcome to the channel. Today I am honored to have Dan Tao, a distinguished expert in SQL tuning, database optimization, and computing in general. Dan's journey in the tech world has been remarkable from his early days at AT&T Bell Labs to impactful roles at Oracle Corporation and TenFold. He is the brain behind SingingSQL, where he revolutionized SQL tuning and database performance. With a Ph.D. in chemical engineering from the University of Wisconsin Madison and multiple patents to his name, Dan's expertise extends beyond databases. His passion for puzzles, games, and innovative solutions make him a unique and inspiring figure in the tech industry. Very warm welcome, Dan. Could you kindly share a bit about your background and experience in the field of computing and anything you else you want to introduce?
Well, thank you, Fudd, and thank you for the very generous introduction. It's been great knowing you over the years. Yeah, well, as you mentioned, I got my start in chemical engineering, Ph.D., way back, far too long to mention. That's as far as I went with chemical engineering. As soon as I was interviewing for jobs out of my Ph.D. program, I found no opportunities in chemical engineering design, which was my specialty at the time, and needed to look elsewhere. And Bell Labs, fortunately, was hiring just basically anybody with an advanced engineering degree who got through their interview process. And so I was very grateful to get the job there, where I did systems engineering, which kind of was glorified tech writing. And having found that to be a little less technically challenging than I was hoping for, I ended up interviewing at Oracle, where fortunately my older brother was already working and they liked him, so they thought they'd give me a look. And that's I've been in the database world ever since. And I was starting in 1989. And so I found myself in this database world where I knew nothing. I didn't really have a clue what goes on inside a database. And I knew a little bit about how to put together shell scripts in Unix. So knowing that, I thought, well, I'll do what I know. And so I was asked to look at performance, but you kind of look where if you have a hammer, everything's a nail, right?
That's right.
And so I knew a little bit about Unix. So I started looking at, well, have we got enough CPU? Is there too much paging and swapping and stuff like that at the Unix layer? And for an embarrassingly long time, I ended up looking at performance issues from that perspective before I finally figured out in about 1995, 5 years later, because I joined late 89. I found out that, well, that's not actually where the most interesting problems are. The most interesting problems turn out to be in SQL, which I knew far less about than I knew about Unix, although I didn't know Unix all that much either. And so I started to look at performance from the perspective of what SQL statements are a problem instead of, is there a CPU bottleneck, which there never was anyway. And so that turned out to be very interesting because it turns out that most of the performance issues are in like the top 20 problems for SQL. And if you can break down the cumulative runtime by SQL statement, what I call top SQL, and this was long before the AWR report existed in Oracle. If you can do that breakdown and focus on the top problems, then you don't have a lot of problems you have to look at to make a big difference. But I still knew nothing about SQL tuning, so I just threw the problems over the fence at the applications group and said, here's your worst SQL statements from the perspective of load. Why don't you work on those and fix them? My assumption was that the people who wrote that SQL were obviously the right people to tune it, and then nothing happened. They didn't get tuned.
By the
And
way,
at the
that is still
time,
the case. People still don't. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. And so I ended up, I was at that time reporting to the CIO, And he asked me, Roy Camblin, I'm always grateful to him for this. He asked me to figure out how to tune SQL. And he thought, well, there's like a top 5 list of things that go wrong, and just come up with the top 5 list, and people can go down that top 5 list, and everything will be great after they do that for the vast majority of the problems. So I started looking at the problem, and I discovered it's not that simple. There is no top 5 list. There's actually, it turns out, a fairly complicated method, which I ended up writing a book about. And that book's still available, called SQL Tuning. And that was published in 2002. And anyway, it's an O'Reilly book, and it spells out the method that I figured out. And the reason nobody was tuning SQL is nobody knew how. I mean, there really wasn't a systematic method out there. There were people who had kind of figured it out without kind of being able to articulate necessarily what they did. But it wasn't anywhere in the literature how to tune a SQL statement in a systematic way.
Yeah.
So anyway, I figured it out, and I benefited as a chemical engineer from having useful ignorance about what was going on under the covers, and having that useful ignorance about computer science. I had to approach the problem as a scientific experiment. So figure out what works by actually measuring stuff. So using the scientific method, because I had no preconceptions about where the problems might be, knowing very little about computer science, using the scientific method, I just experimented and I tried things and figured out. And it turned out that, at least in the area of performance, that was a fruitful approach. And so anyway, I did that at Oracle till 98, and went to TenFold, and left TenFold a few years after that, after it crashed and burned, and did consulting until 22 as a solo consultant. And then I've come back to Oracle. So
Oh,
anyway, that's a long story, but you've been very patient.
all good. Thanks for that. I think that's pretty remarkable, I would say, and interesting too. So when you first joined Oracle and then you came back, do you see any differences?
Oh, hmm. Well, it's a whole lot bigger. It has grown enormously
No.
in size. And but in terms of the feel inside the development organizations, which I've generally been inside both terms, I'm now in the database organization. I was in the application organization at the beginning, with a little stretch in the CIO IT organization, and then back to applications. But in those development organizations, the feeling is pretty similar. Obviously, the product is much more mature
Yeah,
now, and
makes
so
sense.
it's got some deep stuff, and it has a whole lot of stuff that would have been very, very useful
Yeah,
for performance tuning when I was there in the 90s. That wasn't there. I had to
yeah,
kind of get
makes
along
sense.
without it, figure out what was going on under the covers by hook or by crook, but it's a lot better instrumented now. And Oracle, to me, it's I think of it kind of as it's the grown-up database.
Yeah,
So
very
there's a lot of
mature.
databases out there that can do simple things pretty well, pretty simply. But if you got a big system that you really need the instrumentation to figure out what's going on, and you need to do complicated things with it sometimes, or you need the ability to grow to do complicated things sometime, then Oracle is the grown-up database, and it's really got the tools
Yeah,
to work out what's going on and what you can do about it.
I agree with
And
that. Yeah,
I've always appreciated that. It was really when those tools first arrived in 95 that I was first able to get into the database and do useful things there, because in Oracle 6, it was very hard to answer the question of what SQL statements are responsible for most of the load. But then suddenly they were holding the parsed SQL in shared memory in Oracle 7. And I was involved in moving to Oracle 7 beta. And I immediately discovered that, oh, we've got all these $V tables that show you the load. And now we can answer the question of
Yeah.
what SQL statements need to be tuned, which you really couldn't answer before that.
True.
But ever since I've been able to get that answer, it's just been invaluable because there's tens of thousands of SQL statements out there. You don't want to tune all of them. You want to
Yeah,
tune the 20 that matter.
exactly. So that's great. As you know that the whole world right now is almost the whole world is obsessed with AI, and there is a lot of anxiety, fear, confusion. When did you first hear about AI in your career?
Well, so I love science fiction, and I've always been curious about AI, and I'm aware of Moore's law is speeding up computers at an exponential rate. And I always felt that it was inevitable with that kind of exponential advance. I read Ray Kurzweil, for example, who wrote The Singularity is Near. And it's been apparent to me that in probably my lifetime, I would see AI approach human levels of intelligence. And and so I paid attention to, okay, now chess can beat us, and oh, now Go, a Go player can AI can beat us. Wow, that was really something. I love Go, and so it's clear that okay, one area at a time, they're figuring it out, and they do that largely. It was by focusing on that particular problem, so it wasn't a general intelligence at all. But it was clear that okay, there's constant advancement, and at some point, I figured that they would figure out how to make the intelligence more general, and expected to see that in my lifetime. But it wasn't until ChatGPT came along, just I first noticed it like end of 22, beginning of 23, that it's like wow, this thing can maybe pass a Turing test.
Yeah,
And that's always been the gold standard for human level intelligence is well, it can fool somebody in a conversation. And so that was just a real wow moment. It's like wow, this has really made a leap. So I started to pay a lot more attention to what's going on with these LLMs, and I've been learning about that and actually looking at some innovations connected with that at Oracle. And and so it was a wake up moment that it may be a lot closer than it appeared to be in 2022.
yeah.
And I'm obviously not the only one. A lot of people woke up in 23 and said, "Whoa,
What happened?
something big is happening here,
Yeah,
and it's going to make some big changes."
yeah,
And right now, if all the chatbots did was just continue on sort of a boring curve of continuing to become better chatbots that answer questions that people put to it, uh, with more and more knowledge and better language, and maybe a little more flexibility and a little less hallucination, and maybe more knowledge about the real world, which we maybe could give them by training on video more, not just text streams.
yeah,
Then that could be a very big deal very fast. Even if it never reached ability to do everything a human
yeah.
could do, it would still make a very big difference. But it potentially, I believe, following that path, could reach human level intelligence to do pretty much anything.
So, in your
Now,
opinion,
where does it fail?
yeah,
So one of my favorite problem to give a chatbot, I say, can you touch your right elbow with your right thumb?
interesting.
And And they're not good at that. At least, when I tried it, they weren't. Um, they didn't seem to have a sense of the three-dimensional reality of the world, which, if you think about something that was just trained on text,
Yeah.
that's not surprising. Yeah, that's not a surprising failing. And so, the chatbot would confidently tell me that, oh, yes, absolutely. Most people can do that if they're flexible enough. And they would even tell me how, reach over your right shoulder and okay. So, so they're not there yet, but that doesn't mean they can't get there with
Yeah.
better training, maybe very, very soon. And the thing is that if it can get to human level intelligence at, even doing a few things well, like programming, which they do seem to be pretty good at, then they can self-improve. They can generate their next version and their next version, and that could lead to truly exponential growth in their capabilities. And that has huge implications for humans' future and the future of the economy, the labor market, everything. It may turn out to be a harder problem than a lot of people think today. Suddenly people have gotten a lot more optimistic since ChatGPT came out.
Yeah.
But it may turn out to be a harder problem. But we need to be prepared in case it doesn't turn out to be so hard. And we need to be thinking about, how do we want to use this and how can we make sure that it's working in a way that serves our interests or at least doesn't hurt us.
So should the governments be regulating this AI just like they did with this nuclear energy, like that only few select countries or companies can develop these LLMs and nobody else can? Do you think that's the
Well,
solution?
so good luck to any country that wants to tell another country not to do this.
Yeah.
Um, that's just not going to work. I mean, they can make it harder. They
Yeah.
can they can say, okay, we're gonna, not, we're gonna try to corner the market on the GPUs that are good at this, and make it really hard to buy thousands of those. Uh, and so they can try to slow other countries down if they like. And we have U.S. has I'm in the U.S. has economic sanctions with North Korea, for example, and so U.S. is not going to let North Korea get a lot of GPUs if they can help it. But it's just not the sort of thing that one country can really block another country from doing. It's comparatively easy to block another country from getting a lot of uranium-235
Yeah.
because that's a big, noisy technology that can show up on satellite images. But an office space where people are programming is just an office space where people are programming. You can't tell whether they're developing AI or doing something completely different. And so one country is not going to be able to block another country from doing this, at least not without the help of a super intelligent AI already created that could maybe figure out that problem.
Yeah.
But it's not going to be countries blocking countries. It may be countries restraining companies,
Yeah.
and that can happen. Although there will be a tendency if, say, the US said you can't do this, then the company that wants to do it will do it in another country.
Yeah.
So it would be difficult to do this without blocking, without all the countries
Yeah.
cooperating.
True.
And every country has an incentive economically to be the one that gets there first. And
Correct.
that tends to block regulation.
Okay.
In the US and probably a lot of countries, there also may be constitutional issues of, is computer code, protected under free speech
Yeah.
as something that the country can't regulate. Now, maybe the country could regulate, okay, you can't provide access to this to the whole world. But developing an experimental version, that might be protected under the Constitution. And any effort to block research, which would be very hard to block anyway as
Yeah,
a practical matter,
makes sense.
could turn out to be, Supreme Court just says, no, you can't do that.
Yeah. Now, one thing so as you said that you are based in US, I'm based in Sydney, Australia,
Mhm.
and across the industry in Sydney and other cities of Australia, I see a lot of anxiety around the job losses, impending losses, should I say.
Mhm.
So, what is your thought on this impending job losses? Is AI going to cause a mass job loss across the globe, or would it enable us? How do you see it?
Well, so if it stays similar to where it is now, just sort of a slow natural growth of where it is now, which would be surprising because it is growing already really fast between just 23 and 24. If it kind of stayed doing the same kinds of things that it's doing now, what it could do is simply make the existing employees who do language-based things and want to answer questions and want to edit the documents that they're writing, it could make all of those people much more productive and produce higher quality work. And there is a pent-up demand for more productivity and higher quality work. So, it's been said that, for example, okay, what if this made programmers 5 times more efficient? Would that mean that we'd lay off 80% of the programmers? Well, no, if we actually need 5 times more programming than we're getting now. And so in the short run, it might actually make the whole economy much more productive and make a lot of people better off and potentially get better pay and all of that. So in the short run, it might just look like a great thing. If it reaches full human level intelligence where it can do anything a human could do, and it quickly figures out, knowing that, how to program itself to operate robots that can physically do anything a human can do, then companies will have a situation where, well, they could hire a robot to do this, or if it's, the kind of work that I do, it wouldn't even need a robot because it's just work on a computer anyway. Um, it wouldn't need a physical robot.
Yeah.
So I could be completely replaced. Uh, Anybody doing physical work that a robot could do could be completely replaced. And companies would say, well, I can buy this robot or lease this robot for $5,000 a year, uh, or I could pay a human minimum wage in the U.S. and let's take the U.S. economy, and that's a lot more than $5,000 a year. So it's like $20,000 a year
Yeah.
in a lot of states. It's around $10 an hour. And the human is, difficult to work with and doesn't work 24 hours a day and wants to unionize and all kinds of
Right.
things about the human labor that are inconvenient from a perspective of a boss who just wants to make a lot of money, or an owner, because the boss can be replaced too. So what would be left would be the owners.
Yeah.
So the owners of the company could say, yeah, let's just replace everybody. It's a no-brainer. They'll be more productive and they'll never go on strike and they'll never ask for a raise and never cause any trouble, uh, generate lawsuits for this or that, by doing the wrong thing or by having the wrong thing done to them. And so they sue the company. And so it's kind of a no-brainer for the owners of that company to just say, well, we're going to replace the whole workforce with AI and fire everybody. And then we'll have this massively profitable organization that is just like pure profit from that point forward. And the robots can build more robots, and the company can grow double every 6 months in size, and we'll just take over the entire world economy. And so that scenario sounds like, well, wow, what if that happened? What would that mean for human beings? And if you just took the the law and the economy and the free market the way it is right now, and you just sort of extrapolate that out, you could see a situation where you could have, a small number of stockholders in the companies that actually control this
Yeah.
AI IP, and and this is, by the way, assuming that the AI, even though it's smarter than the stockholders, actually does what the stockholders want it to
True.
do, right? So they have control of it, and it hasn't just completely broken free. And that's a whole separate question. What happens if that happens? But let's say it follows whatever the owners tell it to do. And so you could have a small number of people who own stock in these companies that kind of made the breakthrough. And they're incredibly rich. I mean, they make Bill Gates look like a pauper. And everybody else has nothing to sell.
Yeah. True.
They have no labor that's worth anything. They have the property that they happen to own at the time, and a lot of people have more debt than they have property, so it's zero or almost zero. And I mean, a crazy scenario would happen here, where okay, you got this giant company that can produce uh, 10 times more than the world economy, a handful of companies, or maybe just one company that can produce 10 times more than the world economy produces today. And yet, there's almost nobody to buy anything from it.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of this insane scenario where you have the ability for everybody to be fabulously better off than they are today. And yet, if you just sort of did nothing and just let the economy, let the free market do whatever it wants to do and don't introduce any new laws or anything like that, you could have a situation where, in spite of the economy being able to make everybody fabulously well off
Yeah.
compared to today, in every part of the world, every corner of the world, and to do it in a way that's environmentally okay, because a
Yeah.
super smart AI can figure out how to do it environmentally safely as well, solve global warming, everything, because it's 100 times smarter than us. It works 24 hours a day and thinks 50 times faster than we do, or 5,000 times faster than we do.
Yeah.
And so you have this ability to solve all the problems, and yet, in spite of that, if you just sort of let everything happen, you'd have a core of people who are well, they're actually not fabulously rich because nobody's buying anything from them,
True. Yeah.
but they do have all these robots and everything else that can build them anything they want.
Yeah.
So they're rich in that sense. Okay, they can build 5,000-foot long yachts and own entire states. Because they buy. Okay, they buy property, right? So the one thing that would still be sort of scarce would be property. So in order to even survive, the people who actually own property, maybe they sell to these people, and
Yeah.
so gradually they just build these, kingdoms where they've got, the state of California belongs to one of them, and 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 you know and everybody else is like squeezed in some little tiny corner of Nebraska that nobody wants, and not to insult Nebraska,
Yeah.
but and they're starving,
True.
right? So I mean, it's nuts.
It's nuts. And
It would
just
just
on.
be nuts. And if it was a democracy still, then, well, the people who are starving are not just going to say, oh, that's fine, I guess I'll have to starve. No, they're going to tell the government, if it's a democracy
Yeah.
still, at this point, and this fabulously rich organization doesn't take over the government with the help of its AI, then then they're gonna vote for a change. They're gonna say, okay, you have to tax the heck out of these trillionaires
Yeah.
and help us with a universal basic income that's generous,
Awesome.
right? And that allows us space to live and a nice roof over our heads and plenty of great food to eat and wonderful medical care and all the rest of that. And so and they could do all this. And now the giant company would actually have a market for what it's selling, which
Correct.
could be
The-
good. And they could still, these rich people could still, well, they wouldn't have the state of California, but they could have, San Francisco belongs to them, and or Monterey Bay. Oh, that's a beautiful place. Give them Monterey Bay, and they could like own all of that.
yeah.
And still everybody would be better off. The rich people would be better off, and everybody else would be better off too. And
I
hopefully the
yeah.
country that got there first would also realize that maybe they don't want the rest of the country to be desperate, and desperate people start wars, and
I
so they
yeah.
share, right?
Exactly. So these are the worries which I believe that a lot of people are airing, and I think that really makes sense. And we have just 1 minute left in the time slot. Can I ask you that
I'm happy
anyone
to go
who,
longer if you want, by the way.
yeah, our Zoom time is
Oh, it's
actually,
running out. Okay.
yes, it's running out. So otherwise, I could go on for the whole day. Maybe we would do another episode on this one because I don't
Let's
think
do
so.
it.
I have covered everything here.
I would love to.
I think half of it still remains, so we will definitely do another episode. But for this one, just in a, if you want, if you could please in just 1 or 2 lines, any advice to anyone who is looking to get started in a career in AI or in computing in general, what would be that advice?
Be prepared to be very, very flexible. Whatever skills you have, they will probably be obsolete in a short while. So be good at learning new skills, and just be very prepared to be very flexible. And if humans continue to be employed, then they'll be doing different things throughout their career. If they're not continuing to be employed, if we're all just happy owners who live in luxury, learn wisdom about living a good life, because that's still going to matter. So, how you get along with your family and how you are to your spouse and your children, that's not going to stop mattering, and that's not going to stop being a challenge, because there's still going to be plenty of human conflict. So work on wisdom in living a good life, because employment is not the only basis for a good life.
Got
You
it.
can have a great life by being a wonderful person to the people you know, and
Awesome.
helping them also have a great life.
That's amazing. Thanks. Where people can find you if they want to get in touch, if they have any questions around this. We have just 20 seconds left.
Okay, well, my email address is not hard to find online, so I might as well give it out here. It is my home email, not my work email. It is dantow, DANTOW, at singingsql.com.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Dan. Much appreciated. Really loved it. And we will definitely do another episode. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Fad. It was a real pleasure.